Thank God you can get a country breakfast without actually going into the country. Because out here, there be ghosts and ghouls and critters that might want to turn you into breakfast yourself. And I can guarantee right now I do not go very good with fried eggs. These are allegedly true and creepy country stories. Enjoy, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'd love to hear stories from the Appalachian Mountains or the Rocky Mountains. Also, follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify and iTunes if you prefer to listen hands-free. Leave us a review on iTunes too if you can. Thank you. Now, let's begin. The Stalking Growls, from Aurora Forgotten Sorrows. I was hitchhiking through rural Kentucky, trying to get to Georgia to visit my family. I remember it getting dark, and I was getting towards the end of the neighborhood. I could see where the dark countryside began. It was getting really dark outside, and I was under the new moon, so there was no moonlight. I was approached by a dark, mysterious man cloaked in all camouflage. He said, "You might not want to go any further. It'll get ya." I laughed in my head and thought it would be safe to proceed. I remember while walking that the road was alongside a dense forest. I began to feel more at home because I was raised in the backwoods and was tired of the city. While walking, I began to hear footsteps. They were heavy, yet you could tell they were smaller than a human's footsteps. I was thinking maybe it was just an animal. After walking 5+ miles, I began to hear something growl, a very demonic growl. There were no cars for hours on the highway that night. I kept thinking that this, whatever it is what that man was referring to. I stopped and the footsteps stopped as well. What I saw was a dog, but much different. Its growl was deep and intense, somewhat demonic. It looked as if it had a lion's mane. Its ears were pointed out like horns, and its eyes glowed red. I was paralyzed by fear. It was nearly 10 feet long, and was as tall as I was on all fours, and I'm 5'4". His demonic growls turned to roaring barks. I thought in my head it was some sort of possessed Boston Mastiff. Whatever it was preparing to charge right at me. It stood maybe 5 feet away. I can run pretty fast, but I felt as if this thing would catch me either way. In the distance, I heard a car flying as if someone put the pedal to the metal. The dog ran off in a hurry. The driver slammed on the brakes after I jumped out of the road. They asked if I was okay and if I needed a ride. I said, "Yes, please." The driver replied, "Yeah, I saw something and thought I was going to hit it. Don't know what it was, but it looked threatening." Well, he took me to the end of the forest, back to another town, where I could continue my journey. When I finally made it back home in Georgia, I researched wild Boston Mastiffs in Kentucky. The only thing I could find, remotely similar to what I saw, was information on a Kentucky local folklore, the Kentucky Hellhound. I thought for sure I was going crazy after that. I looked up more on it, and the dog looked exactly like that hellhound is described. My heart sank. I realized that if that man in the car wouldn't have shown up when he did, I probably wouldn't be typing this experience out right now. Only thing that's got me confused is the fact that I spotted this creature south of Covington, Kentucky, near the Appalachian Mountains. Why am I seeing it in north-central Kentucky's flatland? I can't wrap my mind about this, and sometimes I still hear the growling in my head. I don't hear many stories on this canine creature, so sometimes I feel as if I was meant to see it. San Saba follow-up of La Lechuza from Bone Dust Crew. This past Halloween night during the blue moon, I was out hunting with my night vision goggles when something very weird happened. Now, I've spent years periodically driving the property with NVGs in search of anomalies, never really finding anything. And then this happened. I was out there with my dad hunting feral hogs. It was a nice night. We could smell a campfire far in the distance. I had my night vision goggles and he had a thermal scope up against a tree at the edge of a large open field. We posted up at dusk. Soon the moon was bright. Even still, some deer wandered within 15 yards of us and eventually noticed us and bolted. But no matter, as they weren't our target, nor was what I saw next. After about an hour, maybe more, it happened. No telltale silence this time. The crickets were still going. But on the other side of the field, about 140 yards away, I saw an almost man-sized barn owl, probably 4 feet tall, maybe more. I could only see it through the optic. I froze. It raised a pair of massive wings into the air, looked up, and with one flap began to rise and vanished. I thought to myself, sometimes moths appear very strange at various distances. As I thought of that, a moth flew by me. My heart sank. Nope, that was real, what I'd just seen. I couldn't tell my dad, he would think I lost it, unless he had seen it too. A few minutes later, the campfire smell disappeared, replaced by a distant smell of dead animal. A few more minutes after that, I thought I heard snorting behind me. I looked over, and sure enough, what turned out to be a 205-pound boar made its way to our left, to the same spot the deer had been in. After I warned my dad, he swung up his rifle and dropped the boar instantly with a well-placed shot. As we were checking the hog for life signs, we heard a loud hooting sound coming from the direction I had seen that flying creature. It was louder than the horned owls we were used to, which we'd heard that night as well. It was also higher pitched. I could tell my dad had heard it too. He wasn't sure what it was. I told him I thought it sounded like someone imitating an owl. With that, we went back to the main camp and called it a night. After I got back, I was telling a friend about it. He told me that it's called La Lechuza. Sounds pretty similar to Skinwalker folklore, but it dates back to when Texas was colonized by Spain. People feared it so much that some folks in Mexico set barn owls on fire, demanding they show their true forms. Like a skinwalker, it is said they have a human form. I found that description strange, because out here, in all the 10 years I've been out here, I've only ever seen horned owls, and they're big, but only up to half that size, and not a luminous white like what I saw. I've learned that La Lechuza can be considered a death omen, and are also known to curse people. Maybe that explains all the other weird stuff that happened out there when I was younger. Hopefully, I won't see it again for another few years. I mean, it's let me live so far. The Farmhouse Phantom, from That Dude 24. This happened when I was 10. I was visiting my uncle's farm in Iowa. They had a large barn, the red paint fading and peeling off the old thing. The place had a driveway that stretched about 80 feet, and then the house was on the left. They had 2 silos behind it. On the other side of the driveway, there was the barn, with a tree in front of it, with an old tire swing hanging on the tree. The barn itself had 3 different lofts and 1 entrance. Inside were bags of fertilizer and old farm equipment just lying about, including a really old, creepy tractor. Now then, the happening started on the second night I was there, the night we invited some neighbors over for a party. We decided to clear out the barn for use and put some stuff in the lofts. I had been requested to put the bags up, which I had no problem with until I got to the top. At the top, I saw a man. He looked up at me and said blatantly, "Hello there." I was speechless. I went down the ladder as fast as my legs could take me. I told my uncle, "There's a man up there." He went up to check, but the last person that had been up there for a year was me. My uncle told me I was probably tired. He then went back down with the neighbors. Cautiously, I went back up again, and the man was still there. I got a better look at him. He looked to be in his 50s with a large mop of hair and scraggly beard. This time I started to talk a bit. I asked him, shakily, "Who are you?" He responded with, "All will be revealed in time," with a smug look on his face. I did my task and ignored him. After the party ended, we went to bed. My bed is on the side facing the barn, which I really hated because of what I saw that night. That night, I saw the barn door move open, yet I was the one who locked that door. I remembered doing it. I decided not to wake anyone and stayed put. I then saw the most shocking thing happen. The old tractor started up on its own. That was absolutely terrifying, as the gas tank in it was empty. I rolled over trying to go back to sleep, and in time I did. The next day, I wanted to sleep in the barn. Yeah, I made some stupid decisions. I just wanted to see what would happen that night. I saw the man climb down from the ladder and sit on the tractor. Then, immediately, he looked right at me and said a plain, "Hello." I had enough. I ran out of the barn, and I could see him following me. I ran over near the silos, but the man was close behind. I then just stopped and yelled out to him, "What do you want?" The man stopped where he was and said, "To be remembered." He had a sad look on his face. Then the man just vanished. I've never seen him again. The following day, I asked my uncle, "Has anyone died here?" He stopped in his tracks. Then he answered, 46 years ago, a 53-year-old man was murdered in the barn. Is that what you've been seeing?" I think he already knew the answer. Stalked and Chased by Bigfoot, from Greg Gamm. This story happened again in that same reservation as my previous tale. This time I was with my nephew and some friends of mine. I was about 21 at the time. This was in the fall before the snow came and the leaves had fallen. On that day, I was going to prepare for hunting season with a bow, but my nephew and some younger friends of mine decided to tag along. They were in a youth hunter program called the Hunter Education Course. I had taken that as well when I was younger. They brought along their guns given to them by their parents or relatives. The area we were in was on my uncle's cattle farm. He had 2 areas he kept them in, but it was basically the outskirts of the reserve. Our designated shooting area was in an area well away from where my uncle's cattle roamed, covered by huge dirt mounds, which we used as a backstop for my arrows or bullets. Of course, we wouldn't be shooting in the cattle's general direction, as we always made sure none of them were in the area behind the dirt mounds. After we confirmed the area was clear, there was this unsettling feeling, and just as I was about to do my speech on the do's and don'ts of gun handling and general gun safety, I stopped mid-sentence with the hairs standing up on the back of my neck. It felt as if something was watching us. As I looked over in the direction I thought it was coming from, my nephew took notice and asked me if I was okay. I said yeah, shrugging it off as nothing more than getting distracted about something. I didn't want to look crazy or tell them what I felt. So we spent most of the day making them take turns shooting their guns, ranging from shotguns to .22 caliber rifles. It must have sounded like a war zone out there now that I think about it. Some moments between those times when they stopped to reload their guns, I got that feeling of being watched again, only stronger and stronger. From time to time, I would look again, trying to find where it could be coming from. Time just seemed to go by so fast. Before I knew it, the sun was starting to go down, and we could barely see anything on the horizon. And to top it off, we didn't bring flashlights either. So I said, "Okay boys, pack it up." I also made sure they unloaded their guns, trying to stress with them that carrying a gun unloaded for safety was extremely important. The trek we were going to take back to where I lived was roughly a couple miles at the most. When we were leaving, I could sense whatever it was that had been watching us was getting closer. As we got closer to where I lived, and I could see the house a few hundred yards away, there was a sense of safety, even though the comfort of home was still so far out, and knowing something was trailing us. I decided to slow down, watching my nephew and the younger guys I was with get quite a ways away from me, but I kept them in my eyesight. I wanted to see if maybe a bear or cougar or wolves were stalking us. After all, we were in an area we had seen them many times before. Just when I was about to put my foot down to take another step, I stopped dead in my tracks, my other foot still above the ground. I was sensing whatever was watching us earlier, now right beside me. I put my other foot back on the ground, and I noticed what appeared to be a bear hiding behind a tree, like some person would if you were playing hide and seek with them. In my mind, this was a bear holding itself against a tree, but I was horrified to see it step away from that tree, coming right out into the clearing I was in. I watched my nephew and friends walk further out. I tried to yell out for them to run, but as I watched this thing, I couldn't get anything out. I was too scared. There in the bright moonlight in the clearing stood not a bear as I was expecting, but something that resembled a Bigfoot, a creature I used to say didn't exist unless you had an out-of-focus camera. But there it was, standing before me, a Bigfoot itself, about 8 feet tall, maybe closer to 9. I could see its muscular outline and huge hands with long fingers. I tried to get a look at its face, but the angle of the moonlight concealed it, so I could only see its head. Its hair went into a point at the top. Maybe it was fear or trauma of what happened after the event, but we all agree that we don't remember a scent or anything like that, as they are known to have strong odors. It felt like minutes staring at the Bigfoot. Out of instinct, I pointed my gun at it. Despite it being unloaded, it was a semi-auto .22. I didn't even have time to load it. The creature growled at me and comes running my direction, an arm reaching forward, as if it's going to grab me. I did my best football player move, spinning around its arm, running around it. I was hoping I would not get grabbed from behind. I run towards my nephew and friends, who were nearly at the house. My nephew sees me and asks why I'm running, but before he can say the word running, he just blurts out, "What the heck is that?" Then, all together, we run. My nephew is trying to load his shotgun mid-sprint. Maybe he wanted to shoot at it or try to scare it off. Once it's loaded, he points it behind himself, staring ahead as he runs. I tell him to shoot, but he refuses, saying that the creature is behind me, running, which meant he would hit me. That's when Tim, the youngest in our group, tripped over a log. To my horror, instead of getting up, he laid there in a fetal position, too scared to get back up and run. As I passed by him, I grabbed him by the collar, telling him to get on his feet. He literally hit the ground running. Thankfully, we make it to my stepbrother's house, bordered by a fence line. My nephew and friends go in first. I make it through, and in the mercury light on the hydro pole, we can see it a bit more clearly. But it didn't step into the light. We watched it and loaded our guns. The thing was moving and turning its head, as if to size us up. I told them if it crosses the fence, to shoot. The creature then turns around and walks back into the darkness until we could no longer see it. We get back to my house, and I ask each of them what they had seen, just to make sure we all saw the same thing. They said it was big, muscular, and wasn't a bear for sure, and we agreed it was a Bigfoot. Now that I think about it, we were probably in an area it chose to mark as its own, and so it chased us out of it. My friend Tim passed away in 2019, but he would always bring up when I saved him and chuckled about how he stumbled being lifted up. Now when I see moonlight and it shines on the trees a certain way, I get chills thinking about that night. Ever since the encounter happened, my nephew and younger friends don't go hunting as often anymore. An Iowa Ghost Story from Styx. Growing up in Iowa is about as exciting as it sounds. Mostly not. Although my family did their best to remedy that. This takes place back in the early 2000s. Our family farm is located on a typical gravel road, with the closest neighbors being my grandparents. The farmhouse itself was around 200 years old and beautifully and sturdily built. As a child, we grew up knowing that ghosts were most definitely a thing, though it was one of those things like, if you don't bother them, they won't bother you. My grandmother, a Lakota Sioux native, was very open to all things spiritual and would often tell us stories about ghosts she used to encounter when she and my grandfather lived in our farmhouse. The same could not be said for my father, however. He's one of those people that if we were to encounter a ghost or something of the like, he would probably just look at it and carry on with his life. No second thoughts given. My room at the time faced our back driveway and a large machine shed. The farm was always busy with hired help working on equipment, semi-trucks entering or leaving with loads of corn or soybeans. It was busy. It was loud. There was basically always people outside. Bright and early one weekend, I was taking full advantage of no school when I heard the sound of my two brothers running up the stairs and pushing open my door. Sarah, who's that girl outside?" One of my brothers asked me. "What?" I replied, not fully caring or hearing what he had just asked. My brothers walked over to the window and pulled my curtain aside, asking again, "That girl out there." Wait, what the heck? My younger brother pushed up beside him to peer out the window as well. Wondering what the heck they were looking at, I rolled over and pulled up my other curtain as my bed was pushed up flush to my 3 side-by-side windows. "What girl?" I asked them. I was super annoyed, but also slightly curious at this point. My middle brother Ben stepped back again and looked at my youngest brother Lyle. "Dude, she was there, wasn't she?" Ben said to Lyle. "Seriously, Sarah, there was a girl staring up at your window." I stared at them both, still waking up. I looked back out my window as if she would just appear out of nowhere, and she didn't. Okay, well, what did she look like? Was it Lacey, Laura? Have you seen her before? Both of them were shaking their heads with wide eyes. My brother Ben, still with great enthusiasm, said, "Do you think it was that little girl that Dad and Grandma always talk about?" I sat there and thought for a moment. Well, I don't know. Let's go outside and ask if one of the hired hands brought their kids with them today first. Getting out of my bed, I was half hoping it was the little ghost girl. My dad, who was a heavy drinker at the time, used to tell us all the time how I woke up last night in the middle of the night and there she was, just staring again. As if it was no big deal that there was a small child, not his child, standing in his room just watching him sleep like a murder movie. He's fun. I followed my two brothers down the wooden stairs, running my hands along the cool, textured plaster walls as I went. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, we immediately turned left to face the back door, leading right out to where my brothers had sworn they saw the girl minutes earlier. As we stepped outside, we were all looking around for other kids, yet there was nothing. The sound of tools and general farm work emanated from the machine shed a few hundred yards away. I followed Ben and Lyle to the edge of our circle turnaround driveway. "Oh my God," Ben said, putting his hands over his mouth. "What?" I said, following up. Ben just pointed down at the gravel-free dirt. In the fine Loess Hills dirt were two perfect footprints. They appeared to have come from that of a small child. Still not convinced these came from a mystical ghost, I said, "Okay, so at least now I know I'm out here for a legit reason, and you aren't just making me look like a fool. Let's go see if there are kids here." I started to walk away toward the machine shed when Lyle said, "Dude, there are no other footprints, like none." I stopped and turned back around. "What do you mean?" I asked him, walking back that direction. "Well, if someone left these footprints, obviously they would have to have walked from somewhere. But there's nothing, like they just popped up out of nowhere." After taking a couple of minutes to look around, he was absolutely correct. We had two perfectly formed footprints and nothing else. Basically freaked out at this point, we carried on our quest to the machine shed. We ran into one of my dad's hired guys, Bert. Bert was an exuberant guy, always happy, slightly loud, but he did have a daughter. At this time, his daughter was around 5 years old. "Hey, what's going on?" Bert said loudly in his drawn-out, happy tone. "Hey, did you happen to bring your daughter with you today?" I asked him immediately. "Nope, she's home with her mom this weekend." My brothers and I looked at each other with the looks of, "Holy crap, what does this even mean?" Leaving the machine shed, we walked around the rest of the farm, checking absolutely everywhere for signs of human life. There was none. Cats, dogs, chickens, encountered all those, but no humans. "What did she look like exactly?" I said to my brother Ben as we made it back to the house and sat at the metal table and chairs on the cement patio beside the back door we had come out of. "She was like 8 or 9 years old, maybe. Blonde curly hair, white dress. She looked like you and me. Nothing weird at all, other than she was just staring up at your window." I sat back in my chair, mulling over this information. "Well, what the heck?" I said out loud, continuing to puzzle. My youngest brother Lyle spoke up just then. "Remember the people that lived on this farm before our family? The Adams? Seriously, no pun intended here. Yeah, their home was destroyed by a tornado and 1 or 2 of them died. After that, they moved to town." Ben responded. I was at that moment completely convinced that the little girl had to be one of the family that had died in that sad accident. After calling my grandmother and asking her exactly which family member of the Adams had died in the tornado, I got a chill down my spine when she confirmed the youngest daughter and the mother. She immediately said, "If you're seeing her, it's okay. She just wants to make sure you're okay. She wakes your dad and grandfather up at night when they're snoring because they stop breathing sometimes. Undiagnosed sleep apnea. And I used to see her all the time when I would be cooking in the kitchen. She's a good girl and just worries." I was completely speechless and kind of freaked out. We all accepted what Grandma said, though, and as adults now, we all agree, and still talk about it now and again. My father still lives out at the old farmhouse, although we don't talk much. I never did get a look at our nice ghost, which seems kind of unfair due to all the ill-wishing beings I encountered as a kid out there. In conclusion, not all ghosts are scary, terrifying monsters. Some are just hanging around to help out and be seen.